Okay, so I'm going to give a bit of an introduction to the book and to Amei, and then we will then I will ask Amei some questions for 20 minutes or so, my own questions. So I met Amei, or Amei, I think is closer to the Chinese pronunciation of her name, when I went to Sydney in 2018. And I was introduced to her, and I went across to do a video interview of her, knowing that she was she'd been in the Cultural Revolution and had a bad time, and so it was a testimony of what happened in the in those years. But it was very bizarre because to get to her, I was in Sydney, which is a beautiful city, and I had to go on a ferry across the harbour, the beautiful harbour with the Opera House, and go across to a nice harbour and get off and walk up to go and to her really lovely suburban house in the sunshine and peace of Sydney. And then it was sitting in this lovely house, I was listening to tales of horror, and it was quite a bizarre juxtaposition to go from one to the other. Amei was born in 1950. So in 1966, at the time of the Cultural Revolution, she was 16. I just mention some of the things that happened that are described in the book. Her house was raided by Red Guards. Things were smashed up and objects were taken. They then had to live in only a fraction of their original home. Her father, who had been the owner of a business, was effectively imprisoned, criticized, and beaten, and so was his longtime associate. Amei didn't see her father for 10 years from that point. She herself, at school, was next door in a room overnight where the Communist Party secretary of the school was beaten to death through the night. She heard the cries go on and on and on until they stopped and the woman had died. She saw her teachers being forced to run around in circles in extreme heat. When one of them asked for water, she was offered urine. Later, after other similarly horrible events, Amei was sent away to a remote, poor village called White Pond, where she stayed for 4 years and worked effectively as a farm laborer. Then she was able to move, by good luck really, to a local county town, Xinjiang, to teach English. And after that, she had the opportunity to go to teach in Taiwan, a provincial city. But she was only able to go back to Beijing with her to be with her family 20 years after she was sent out in the country. Obviously, as you probably know, millions of young people were sent out from cities to the country. When she got back, there was a time when she was able to help students who were demonstrating in Tiananmen Square. A friend of one of her students was killed at Tiananmen Square. Amei's book, Pink Flower, Growing Up in Maoist China, clearly describes the horror of the Cultural Revolution and its aftermath. One of the strengths of the book is that Amei tells the stories of many people other than herself, people she knew, and nearly everyone suffered. Could be loss of property, beating, continuous intimidation, in some cases rape, in many cases poverty and hunger, in some cases death. A picture emerges in which almost everybody suffered. And if you extrapolate that around the country to all the people who lived in Peking and other cities, we're talking about an extraordinary amount of suffering. The estimates for people who actually died in the Cultural Revolution vary between 750,000 and 2 million. But that's, in a way, the tip of the iceberg of the suffering. Another thing that comes across strongly in the book is just how extremely vicious and cruel some people can be in the certain situations. Amei helped a girl called Sally with her homework when she was young, but when the Cultural Revolution came along, Sally turned away from her and became almost a psychopathic, vicious Red Guard, raided Amei's home and beat people with a belt, which seems to have been the usual way. On the other hand, there are moments of great kindness that are referred to in the book, not least by Amei herself. At the end of the book, one is left feeling absolutely sure that the Cultural Revolution was a disaster, a kind of nightmare which even Dante didn't imagine. People were threatened that if they did not disown their parents, maybe even beat them, that they themselves would suffer. It's clear that the process of sending young people to the city was a second disaster. Both these events, the Cultural Revolution and the sending away to the city, were initiated by Mao. Before then, he'd instituted the so-called Great Leap Forward, in which farms were collectivized, resulting in a famine in which as many as 40 million people died of starvation. It's hard to think of any human being who's caused more misery than Mao, and yet his face still appears on the banknotes of China. So, Amei, I now want to ask you some questions after that introduction. The first question is, why the title, Pink Flower?
Okay, that's suggested by the cover designer. And she think of that when I went to the country, first met two exiled scholars, and that event changed my life. And then I thought this happened to be, my name is also a pink flower. It's a flower now blossom in early winter, and late winter or early spring, called the Chinese plum. And so I thought this is good. And also this flower endure the hardship of winter and still blossom. And in Chinese, pink flower, pink means hope. So we actually live on hope. So I thought,
for you, it represents a hope despite all the suffering. Is that right?
yes.
Yeah. Why did you write the book?
Okay, this is a long time build up this idea. First, my students in Sydney asked me about my early life, because when they attend the high school certificate, join the university, a lot of them, some of them want to do medicine. I said, when I was young, my aim is to become a doctor. And then started, why didn't you do so? And I said, the school has shut down, this and that. And they're really interested, curious about my teenage life. So I start to tell them, and I find this also help them to study and to understand China. And also, I find my daughter didn't know much about the old days when I was young. So she was also interested in my early stories. So I started to tell them now and then, and only when I actually retired, I sit down to write it. But this idea is started from early, maybe.
Do you find that people?
Yes.
Did you find that people in Australia are surprised, or do they know much about what happened in the Cultural Revolution and afterwards?
No, they didn't know much at all, because they know there's a Cultural Revolution. Some people wouldn't know. And a lot of them said, yeah, they read something, especially the Wild Swan was the most popular ones among these people interested in China. But my story, they find is also different. It is very amazing. It's very real because this person is here and a lot of details now this build up. And when I first write, I didn't think of just write a book or something, just write some stories to tell my daughter, tell my students. Then friends around me find this, oh, you should write a book. Especially Rafe encouraged me, said, this is not a personal thing, this is something that part of the history. So I started right.
Yeah, well, I'm very glad you did. So yes, you say you mentioned Xinjiang and wild swans. One of the differences between you and Xinjiang is that she came from a red family, and whereas you came up from a black family. Now, can you explain what is the difference between why and how people were divided up into red and black families in China at that time?
Right. This white and this black family and red family is started early when I was little. We know that my sisters need to go to the country or do something that other people don't. So because I was from a family that my father was a businessman before the communists took over, before 1949. And the defined red family are the poor peasants, workers, and the communist officials, army people working in the communist army. All these are the red class. And the black are landlord and rich peasant, anti-revolutionary, and criminals and the rightists. So after the 1957, then there's a rightists. So these are 5 enemies, enemy class. Then from the Cultural Revolution, their children also become black. So I was become the enemy myself during the Cultural Revolution. I remember that a particular day, from that day, big rally, then we were just separated from the Reds. Then we
So
have to do things.
You became, as it were, a kind of enemy of the state just because your father was a businessman.
That's right.
So at the age of 16, you were an enemy and defined as an enemy, and other students were told to treat you as an enemy.
Yes.
Could you tell the story of what happened to your father's associate, Uncle Shan? He had been somebody who had worked with the family ever since he was 11 and was treated as a brother by your father. And then the Cultural Revolution came along. Your father was arrested, and and Shan was told to denounce his longtime friend and associate. Can you tell us what happened to him?
He was condemned in the rally and forced to condemn my father, but he couldn't. He said to that rebeller, said, "You will be punished for your this type of behavior." Then he was bashed very severely and bloody out everywhere. And then he was locked up in a tour room, and there's no food, no drink, no medicine, nothing. So the second night, I think he committed suicide because he was locked in a tour room by himself. So that night he committed suicide. So he died.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a man who'd worked with, you know, your father, your grandfather,
Yes.
many, many years. And eventually he was told by Red Guards he must condemn your father as presumably as an enemy and as a black person and
As a capitalist.
a capitalist Rhoda, I guess, yes. And
Capitalist.
Sorry?
As a capitalist,
Yes.
because capitalist Rhoda are the communist party members who support this capitalists.
Yes, okay. So he was asked to condemn him as a capitalist, and he didn't want to do that, and so he was. You say bashed? You mean beaten? Is this beaten with a belt?
Beaten, just beaten, kick, and by the.
And then if again are told he must do it, and then he refused again, and beaten more, and until he gets to the point where he's alone in a cupboard and decides to kill himself. Okay, so could you then also tell the story of Che Jin, which she was I just summarized with the big background. She was a friend of yours at the village of White Pond. And when you got the job as a teacher, you were still connected because you were still able to go back to the village. You still saw her, but less, presumably. And she became rather dependent on you and rather depressed. And then you got the offer of your dreams, the offer of a place at university, which was a very rare and prized thing to get. And then you were thrilled and excited, but she was dismayed and sobbed. So you suggested that, this is from your book, you suggested she should go to her father in Beijing and live with her father. She said she couldn't do that. You said, why? After a pause, she told you, I am guilty. I caused my mother's death. Can you explain what happened to her mother and why she felt she was responsible?
Okay, she was a really open-minded girl, very happy. But then when I work in the country with her in the village, I never see her smile because in the Cultural Revolution, we all knew that her mother was beaten to death during the Cultural Revolution, but we don't know how hard it was for her. And she was her family was raided not because of family background. Her family was not neither red nor black, but her father, before the communists took over, worked in the national government just as a normal clerk. So, but she was condemned because of this particular Red Guards leader in her class was a revenge. Back then, everybody, young people, encouraged to join the Communist League. And then Chen Jing was a organizer of the league. Is one of the leader of the league. She was a very good student, but none of the committee members agree with to admit this girl because she was very bully. So only 1 week.
Wait a minute, the girl is called, what's her name? Yeah.
Du Su. Yeah, Du Su was not allowed, but this particular committee meeting of the Youth League only happened 1 week before the announcement of the black and white, black and red families. And Du Su was red and Chen Jing was neither red nor, but she has the right to decide which family to raid.
To raid.
Yeah, to raid, to go to bash up people, things like that. So she decided to raid Chen Jing's family. And Chen Jing, you back then, whatever the Red Guards say is the law. Nobody can say anything because the paper and all the media regard this Red Guards is a revolution, is protecting Chairman Mao's red guards, so nobody can say no to them. So went to her home and asked for money for things, because this girl was from a really poor family, and a long story because of this particular girl. And they live in changing the family for 7 days. So they said, we're waiting for this changing the father to came home, because he will work for the nationals. But her father was actually confined to his working unit to be condemned. So he didn't came home. So they hold Chenjing's mother for 7 days, didn't give her any food, and make Chenjing and her brother with the belt to beat their father.
The mother.
They feel their mother. So for 7 days, no food, no drink, so that the mother just died. And when the mother couldn't stand up, they put his hands on the beam in the house. So he just hold there for 7 days. And the 7th day, Chenjing said, from the 5th day, she's no movement, just like dead. But the 7th is really dead. So
but one of the most awful aspects of this is that they told the children, Chejin and her brother, to beat their own mother. Is that right?
That's right. They say if you beat, then we will let her go. But Chenjing couldn't do it, and the little brother did it twice, but they didn't let her father go or her mother go. So they stayed there for 7 days, and Chenjing has cooked for them. And
for the Red Guards, you mean?
Because the mother said, "Don't care about me and just protect your brother." So Chenjing was she said, if not my brother, I would just fight, just died.
Yeah, so she would have fought for your mother if it had not been the fact that the mother had said to her, protect your brother. That's what her priority was. And that's presumably why she felt that her father might blame her for her mother's death. And her father then eventually came back, and his life was really ruined by it.
Yeah, by then her father came back home on the 9th day. Yeah. So the mother has already gone. He found that there's everything changed. The whole house is the blood, and so he couldn't find his wife. And the father was very, very attached to the mother. She thinks that because of the mother died, the father died too. This is mentally. Yeah. You couldn't care about the children, couldn't. So Chenjing thought the father hated her because of her. So the school raided the family. But I never believed that. That's because the father never actually sit down and talk to her about this. She was too hurt, lost his wife. So
the end. What this leads to is that you saw that she was terrifically upset. You had been offered the university place, and you gave up the university place that you had wanted so much, so that Chejin could go to the university and try to rebuild her life, which I think is an extraordinary sacrifice to have made. So I want to go on now to I won't ask one or two more questions. You, in the early part of the book, you make it clear. In fact, you actually say, "I passionately believe that Chairman Mao loved every one of us equally." And you were thrilled to get a glimpse of Mao himself at one of his rallies in Tiananmen Square in August 1966. But you did become disillusioned stopped believing the propaganda. Did this happen at one moment, or was it a gradual process?
It's a long time. It's a gradual process because first have that type of doubt is when I was declared black, not black family, but myself was black, so become the enemy. So and my family home was raided on the 5th of August, but on the 18th of August. We were allowed to go to Tiananmen Square to see Mao. So I was very hopeful. So Mao know everything and will relieve us and will stop all this nonsense. But then the rally make this violence even much more violent. So I start to doubt, but you can't tell anybody, you can't say a word because this is very, very severe. Everything happened around me, which is like a little animal. You have to do whatever you are told. And anybody told you, any red guards can say, stop there. And this is what you just have to do it. The other day that when our principal and the party secretary was beaten, they say, the rest, you're not allowed to go home. So we just stayed in the classroom, the 4 of us in our class for the whole night. You don't have food, you can't tell your parents. I can't tell my mother said where I was. We just have to stay there, just to do whatever they say.
So were there any other events which led you to become disillusioned?
Yeah, it's gradually. The most important part is, I think after this, we went to the country to work for a short while, for 3 weeks, I think, in a mountain village. And in the village, we were organized to have this meeting called Remember the Bitterness of the Old Society and Appreciate the Sweetness of New China. And on those meetings, the peasants, poor peasants, will come to the stage to tell how bad life was in the old society. And then we eat this particular food, said that's what they eat before the revolution. Then later on, I visited this family because I work with the grandchildren of this grandmother. And the grandmother was very kind. And then she told me, said, yes, my husband died almost 8 years. I thought that the 8 years is not old society, is new China. So I start to a bit confused, a bit doubt. Then in 1 more year at school, I was sent to the country. And there, I also meet all the peasants. And I asked the peasants to tell me how hard your life was before the revolution, before the communists. And this particular, very good person and tell me life was better. I was really shocked. So he said before the revolution, because in this area we only now eat wheat, we only plant wheat. But now the party will have to hand the wheat to the party, to the state, and we get corns and sorghum in our food. He said, that's the animal food. Although they were very poor, but the diet, they just say, you can't do anything. They just say, that word actually shocked me a lot. They say the life was better before the communists.
Yes.
But they say that very naturally. So it's unbelievable. And then I met these two exiled scholars. They were sent to that village 10 years before me. So when I got there, they're already there for 10 or 11 years. So then my real education started from there, and we become friends, and they became my teacher. I got this two scholar teacher, start to actually learn. I learned classical Chinese and English and French and Esperanto. So history, everything, and life and politics, they just amazing. With them for 6 years because we work in the same brigade.
Yeah. So in other words, it was a gradual process of disillusion and realizing that the propaganda, which was so powerful that it totally persuaded you early in your life, was, you fell away. I just want to ask one more question. You describe in the book widespread support for the democracy movement and the students at Tiananmen Square in 1989, and you visited there. Do you believe that there is still a desire in China that was evident at the time of the Tiananmen Square events? Do you believe that desire for democracy and freedom still exists beneath the surface?
Definitely. If now there's a movement or something like the students' democracy movement, in one night, this whole people would support them. Now they can't say anything because of the pressure, because of the control. But I believe the people ready for a long time. They just have to be pressed down and have to stop talking, stop everything. Just do. Just get on as your life. Just don't say anything, but everybody knows. And I think there's no problem, no doubt. The democracy is it. I think people were born with the desire for freedom. So, like my sisters and their families, and my brothers in China, they're still living there, and they had a quite a relaxed life now. But they say, don't talk about anything about politics, and don't mention the name of the state leaders, because in China, if you criticize, say like Xi Jinping, you say something about him, then you would be silenced. If you have any influence, you'll be disappear.